Tuesday nights were always a little hectic, especially the second Tuesday of every month. That was my Canis Club meeting, which ran from 6:30 to whenever. May and I didn't get home until 5 o'clock and 5:30, respectively. I didn't have to worry about dinner as Canis was a dinner meeting, but there was always some little thing May, my wife of 4 years, needed done before I could leave. The real problem was my doing, according to May. She was 3 months pregnant, and the hormones were going crazy. She may have been with child, but she was still the dreamboat I'd married. And now, with the mother-to-be glow about her, it was doubly hard for me to leave her, even for one evening. She was just right. 5'3" tall, a well-constructed 110-pound body with light brown hair and incredible blue eyes. Her shape fit me perfectly. I loved her for a lot more than her looks. She was funny, smart, and very observant, but her looks sure didn't hurt. Anyway, I had to leave by 6:10 to get to the meeting on time, so I had to run through the shower, dress, kiss my wife, and get back in the car to head out. I wasn't usually home until after 11 o'clock, and often it was after midnight. The meeting tonight didn't look to be any different. After the shower, I threw on slacks and a sports shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and headed through the kitchen to the garage. I kissed her on the back of the neck and gave her a squeeze to keep her from falling. She always wobbled when I kissed her on the neck like that, so I had to steady her. Then out the door into the garage with a rueful glance back at May. It was sure tempting to skip the meeting, not only for May but because I had a project in the works in the garage. I was just finishing installing a baby monitor for what was going to be the nursery, and I figured maybe 30 minutes, and it would be ready to show off to my bride. She was always so appreciative of my small accomplishments, and I felt no qualms about milking her for compliments, however misdirected. I was a guy, after all, and didn't mind having my woman stroke my ego. Climbing in the car, I activated the garage door opener and started the car. While the engine started purring, I set my briefcase on the seat next to me and checked that I had everything I needed. Cell phone, calculator, notebook, all were there. Then I backed out of the garage and down the driveway to the street, waving to May of the kitchen window where she was doing the dishes. She waved back as I reached the street. Before I could put the car in gear or even close the garage door with the remote, the cell phone rang, and I stopped everything to answer it. As I said hello, I looked up to wave to May one more time, but she had already disappeared from the window. "Gary," came the voice over the phone. "Glad I caught you. The meeting tonight is off. Our good president, Patrick, along with both Everett and Jules, have been called out of town. So with the president, treasurer, and secretary all gone, we thought it best to call it off this month. Nothing scheduled for tonight, unless you have something that can't wait." Needless to say, I was glad to take the night off. I just pulled right back into the garage, noting idly that May's face hadn't reappeared in the kitchen window of our 3-bedroom rambler. Yes, she had missed that I hadn't left, so I could surprise her later on. If she had been anywhere but the kitchen, she wouldn't have heard me drive back into the garage. Once in the garage, I lowered the garage door finally, and then sat in the car, just relaxing for a few minutes. I decided I'd just call out for pizza tonight, and not bother May to make dinner, or take the time making it myself. I'd just take the time to get that monitor finished. Everything concerning the camera and the baby's room-to-be was done except for some connections in the garage and final testing. The cosmetics in the nursery were pretty minor. The camera was mounted in a corner and was so small May hadn't yet noticed it, and it had been mounted for 10 days now. I'd get those done another time. May had casually mentioned how much a monitor in the nursery would save her steps checking on the baby when it was napping. Hence, my wiring the house. I'd decided to set up sound monitors in each of the rooms in the house while I was at it. The visual monitor in the baby's room had been an inspiration when I'd seen some gear a friend was tossing out. The master controls were in our bedroom, but since I spend a fair amount of time in my garage workshop, I had a second master in a corner of the garage, complete with speakers and an old TV subbing as the video monitor. It was flexible enough that the nursery could be monitored from any place in the house. As I mentioned, the whole thing was about complete with just a little tune-up needed before I could show May, surprise her, and get my plaudits. So I decided to see if I could get the work done before I came in and collapsed in front of the tube for the night. Or maybe collapsed on May for the night. That sounded even nicer. So I slipped out of my car and began checking my work. It took me maybe 20 minutes before everything seemed to be warm and working properly, so I started checking out the sound feeds. Each of them could be turned on and off separately, or I could feed them all into the 5 second-hand speakers I had lined up above my little corner. I quickly checked each one separately, starting with the living room. They all worked perfectly, actually pretty sensitive, because I could hear May taking a shower in the bath off the master bedroom. I set them up so they were all live and feeding into the garage. Then I began the last connections for the video monitor. I got kind of lost in my wiring checks when I heard someone on the living room speaker. It sounded like May was on the telephone. I turned the sound up a bit to see how it worked, and it was perfect, beautifully clear. The $20 I'd spent on the 5 speakers had been a real bargain. "Roger, it's May. If you can be here by 7 o'clock. It's on, lover," came my wife's voice over the speaker. "Okay, love, I'll see you then. Don't you dare be late. We won't have near enough time as it is. And no, don't figure on getting a repeat." There was a little pause. Then May giggled and hung up the phone. What the heck was that about? What is on? And Roger? Well, the only Roger I knew was Roger Jenkins, his wife Crystal, and May had been roommates in college. Crystal was still May's best friend, and Roger and I hit it off pretty well too. He was a big guy and a lot of fun. I guess he and May had a few dates before Crystal, and he hooked up. We spent a lot of evenings together and had enjoyed many a picnic together. The 2 girls were pretty close. May told me they'd done some real crazy girl things together at college. She had calmed me down when she gave me a kiss and told me they hadn't done anything I should be worried about. I kind of shrugged my shoulders, figuring May and Roger were planning something for Crystal. I'd find out at 7 o'clock anyway, which was only 15 minutes away. Giving up the speculation, I flipped the on button for the camera in the baby's room and sat back with a smile on my face. The monitor showed the room clearly. Actually, we still had it set up as a spare bedroom, and the monitor was focused directly on the big queen-sized bed. I was surprised to see the bed was made, and the sheets turned down. It was the first time I'd seen May make it up when we weren't expecting guests. Checking the video controls, I zoomed the camera in and out. At the widest zoom, I could see everything in the bedroom except into the corner where the camera was fixed near the ceiling. I left it there at that setting and critically examined the picture. The door, window, and closet were visible, and the bed, of course, was centered in the shot, and all were clear as a bell. Leaving the controls as they were, I started cleaning up my workbench. Feeling pretty good about myself and the sound and picture system I'd made, I pulled a beer out of the old refrigerator and leaned back in my $50 recliner. We'd picked it up at a yard sale, and my wife wouldn't let it in the house, but it fit me in the garage beautifully. Well, I'll admit it fit the garage perfectly anyway. I was just about finished with the beer and thinking of ordering out for some pizza and going in to surprise May when I heard the front doorbell. A second later, I heard the door open and heard May greeting the visitor. "Hey, I've had a hard time waiting. Come on in, Roger. We have until 10:30, and then it's over. But until then, I'm yours all the way." I was stunned, not by the words, but by the way my wife's voice sounded. The only time I'd heard that husky timbre in her voice was in our bedroom, or when we were on our way to the bedroom. It was her "do me, baby" voice. I choked on the last mouthful of beer and sat bolt upright. On the speaker, I heard the front door shut. Then May's voice again. "Damn, Roger. From the look and feel of this bulge in your pants, I'm not the only one who had a hard time waiting. Looks really good. Come here, honey. Give me a real hello," I heard Roger say. Then there were several minutes when it was almost silent. All I could hear were a few grunts and moans. Then, "Roger, not here. Come on back to our room. I've got it all set up for us," from May. I thought I was going to be sick to my stomach. It sounded like May was taking him back to her bedroom. Jesus, what was going on? I didn't know what to do. My first impulse was to burst through the door into the kitchen and throw Roger out of the house. Still, what was actually going on? I took a big breath. It couldn't be what it sounded like. May and I were in love. I was sure she had been as faithful to me as I had been to her. She teased me about looking at lovely women, but I knew she was sure it was only looking. I'd never really had an impulse to stray. We were compatible lovers. She always had all she wanted when we made love. She was used to multiple climaxes, and I never finished loving her until I was convinced she really didn't need or want any more. This had to be a misunderstanding on my part. It had to be. She was my best friend. She was going to have my baby. I was just sitting there in the ratty old lounger when my eye caught movement on the monitor in the baby's room. The door opened, and May gently pushed Roger into the room with the made-up bed. She pushed him around to the other side of the bed, between the bed and the window. Then she swayed back around to stand on the other side, in front of the closed closet doors. She was looking across the bed at Roger and almost right into the camera. May was dressed in her worn-out, ratty old Saturday/Sunday morning robe, which reached to just mid-thigh. Her hair, however, was pulled up into a sophisticated bun atop her head, emphasizing the slender column of her throat. She had applied makeup, just the right amount. She looked like a princess receiving her prince, except for the ratty old, worn-out robe. On her feet, she was wearing the pair of high-heeled slippers I had bought her for her birthday 2 months ago. She had worn them that evening, and I had told her how they emphasized her magnificent legs, but I didn't remember them being out of her closet since then. Now, sooner had that thought come to me when I knew. No, I hadn't seen them out of her closet since then. I felt like I was about to cry. This couldn't be happening. My wife stood tall and proud across the bed from one of my best friends, looking directly into his eyes. Her hand slowly came up to the throat of the robe. With her left hand holding the robe closed at the neckline, she used her right hand to unsnap each button, slowly working her way down. When each fastener came loose, the robe would billow out around it, teasing Roger with glimpses inside her robe. Once she had undone all the buttons, while continuing to hold the robe closed, she brought her right hand back to her throat, and using both hands, she slowly peeled the robe open. Once open, she stood for a moment, letting us admire the vision framed by the robe. Then she let her hands drop, shrugging her shoulders to let the robe drop and puddle around her feet. She was wearing the lingerie I gifted to her on Valentine's Day. She had modeled the set for me on Valentine's Day. I had not seen it since. Still looking into Roger's eyes, she held up a hand and crooked a finger at him, ordering him to come to her. When he turned to come around the bed, I saw my former friend's stunned face. He choked out, "May, I was expecting to be with you tonight, but you have made this really special for me. God, but you are beautiful." They both got undressed. I suddenly came out of my dazed depression. No matter how this worked out, I was going to need proof of what was happening. Thinking for a minute, I hurried into the now deserted living room. Making as little noise as possible and working quickly, I got a fresh SD card, took it back to the garage, hooked it up to the monitor, and turned everything back on. The monitor came alive, showing Roger and my wife. I almost cried. Through the tears, I saw them move to the bed, clasping one another tightly. They started going at it. It seemed to go on forever. Roger was driving into her relentlessly. After maybe 15 minutes, she tried to pull out from under Roger. I stared at the sickening scene on the monitor for a few more minutes, then got up and began pacing. I knew if I walked into that house, murder would be done. I was sick to my stomach and totally unable to think of what I should do next. "Roger, unless you want Gary to walk in on us, you have to go." Now." And she bent, picked up his clothes, and handed them to him as she gathered the remains of the lingerie she had gifted to him along with herself, placing it on the dresser. I watched as May threw on her old robe and stripped the sheets off the bed, not even waiting for Roger to finish dressing before she had bundled them up and taken them to the washer in the laundry room between the kitchen and garage. When she walked back into the living room, Roger was there, and with the lilting brag voice men often use, he greeted her. "Hey, lovely lady, that was great. We really have to talk about doing it again." "No, Roger," she answered. "I meant it when I said just the once, and only because of our deal. And I guess for old time's sake too." Roger answered, "Sure, honey, I understand. But sometime you may get to thinking of us sometime in the future. This was just for once, I agree. But if you start thinking about how great it was, maybe we can try it again." I heard the sounds of another sloppy kiss before his footsteps seemed to fade as he went to the door. I could hear the impatience in my wife's voice and the little sounds she was making, but it didn't register at the time. Nor did the exhalation she made when she finally followed him to the door. Literally sick to my stomach, I lay back in the ratty recliner, looking at the now empty bedroom showing on the monitor. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 10:37. They had stayed on their time schedule very well. I heard Roger murmuring something at the door and clearly heard May reply. "No, Roger, this was just the one time and only because of our agreement so many years ago. Gary is my husband, my lover, and the man I want in my life. I'm not sure why we did it now myself. Besides, Crystal may be okay with this, but she's my best friend. She's more important to me than an affair. Isn't she more important to you?" I couldn't understand Roger's mumble, but I heard another kiss and then heard the door shut quietly. Almost immediately, I heard the lock click home. If I hadn't been so filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion sounding in Roger's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny. At the moment, it certainly didn't seem funny at all. After the door shut, May reappeared in the spare bedroom. I couldn't seem to think of it as the baby's room anymore. She quickly went over the room carefully, making sure nothing was amiss after the tryst. Gathering up her clothes, she disappeared into the hall, and I soon heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her shower, and then she was out, and I heard the bed rustle. It sounded like my wife had gone to bed. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was almost 11 o'clock. I just sat and stared into space. I had no idea where my life and my wife were going from here. I only knew I was heartsick. Thoughts and ideas crowded through my head. In some, I thought of things that would excuse my wife for what she had done. In others, I answered the excuses, and in yet others, I asked myself what I had done to cause her to need another man. Sometime after midnight, I wearily arose and turned the electronics off. Entering the house through the garage door, I headed directly to the master bedroom. Passing the spare room where my wife had rutted with Roger, I glanced in. The room was just as I had last seen it Monday evening. The bed was stripped, and nothing seemed out of place. There was nothing to tell that anything had taken place. Groaning to myself, I entered my bedroom. Glancing at my sleeping wife, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and did my business, stripping off my clothes and leaving them in the dirty clothes hamper. Before dropping them in, I glanced in, and the hamper was empty. No soiled lingerie there. When I climbed into bed, my wife rolled over, and throwing an arm over me, she sleepily asked how my night had been. After a moment's silence, I told her it had been very traumatic, but I would tell her about it later. Usually, she snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly, pulling her arm back and rolling over with her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, though listening to her breathing, I thought she was still awake. I just rolled away from her, then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping at all. When the alarm went off, I just lay there. I was certainly in no shape to go to work. Telling May I thought I had the flu, I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and began carefully opening drawers, being sure not to displace anything as I searched May's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag and under some sweaters, was the lingerie Roger had enjoyed. I pulled them out, noting the crotch of the ruined panties was still damp. After calling my boss and begging off work for the day, I watched the tape I'd made the night before. When I began, I just skipped through it, not wanting to relive the experience again, just wanting to be certain the tape was good. But after a bit, I began noticing things I had missed the night before. I spent the rest of the morning studying the video and what it held. I made 2 copies and made 2 calls. Going home, I realized I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. I'd missed last night's dinner, and the thought of breakfast this morning had turned my stomach. I didn't have the flu, but my stomach was still very upset. May got home at her usual time, about 4:30. When she came in to give me a kiss, I turned my head, and she kissed my cheek, giving me a strange look. Finally, about 5:30, I decided there was no real reason to put this off any longer. I was only getting myself more upset. "May, I'd like to show you what I've been doing for the baby monitor we were talking about. Do you have a few minutes?" I asked. "Gary, can you wait until after dinner? I'm just about to put it on," was her answer. Picking up my cell phone, I asked her what she wanted to eat tonight. She smiled at me and suggested Chinese, so I ordered it delivered. Then I took her into the bedroom and showed her again how the controls worked on the console in the corner behind the door. I turned on the sound and left her there while I went from room to room, talking to her over the monitor from each room. Of course, she couldn't answer me, but when I got back to the bedroom, the smile on her face told me she understood it was working better than we had planned. Turning on the video portion, I told her to wait and watch a moment, and leaving her in the bedroom, I stepped into the spare room and stood where she had stood last night. There I grimaced and pantomimed a slow bump and grind before I returned to our bedroom. She enthused, "Gary, that's perfect. When did you get this going?" "This afternoon." "Actually, May, I got it going last night," I answered. She had a puzzled little smile, and I could see she was trying to figure out when I'd had a chance to do it last night. "One more thing to show you, May." I took her hand and led her to the garage. I spend a lot of time here and thought it a good idea to have a monitoring station here to cover the baby when you have to go out. Then I turned the system on in the garage. "One thing I added last night. Let me show you how it works." And I slipped a USB drive into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her. Watching the monitor, of course, we saw the same view as from our bedroom. The view I had first seen last night of an empty room, though now the bed was unmade. Then I used the remote to turn on the TV, and the picture immediately changed to show May on her knees before Roger. Glancing at her face, I saw the color had drained from it, and she seemed to sway before catching her balance. She looked suddenly at me, and I just looked in her eyes and pushed fast forward, stopping in just a couple seconds. Then I gestured to her to watch the screen again. When she looked back, she saw Roger grabbing at her panties. There was no sound, but we could see May say something to him. We both watched and then heard the small scream she gave, which I now realized was pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw tears running down May's face, and also saw the little cringe when she saw again the rough way Roger had driven himself into her. Stopping the video, I asked if she wanted to see more. My wife just looked helplessly at me. "Come in the house now, May. I think we have a lot to talk about, and I don't know where this is going." With that, I led her into the kitchen, where I sat her at the kitchen table, and then sat down at the end of the table next to her. "I can explain," May mumbled while the tears ran down her face. "That's what I need." "An explanation," I answered. "What is the explanation?" "Gary, this goes back to college and a promise I made one night to Roger." "How many years ago did you promise yourself, May?" I asked. "No, Gary, it wasn't like that. We were both drunk. Roger and I had been dating. He and I were an item. He was a hunk, and I liked him. For a while, I was wondering if he was the one. Everyone thought we were, but I didn't want to get committed, and he never really pushed for us to be intimate, though he had a real reputation as a lady killer. I started rooming with Crystal, and they began dating. For a while, he was going out with both of us, though I guessed Crystal, and he ended up in bed soon after he started taking her out. Nothing serious for Roger and me, but Crystal and he were heading toward where they are now. Roger had an interesting reputation among the co-eds. Until I came along, there was a lot of competition to get a one-night stand with him, and he was supposed to be pretty special in bed. I wasn't a virgin, I told you that, but I was pretty particular about handing out my favors. One night, Roger and I were sitting around my room, sharing a few drinks while waiting for Crystal to come back from whatever she was doing. We started talking, and as we drank, we both got more and more risque. Somehow, in our conversation, I told Roger that the only reason he and I hadn't been intimate was my fear of getting pregnant. That wasn't really the only reason, but it was one I could give him, and he had turned me on pretty hard on occasion. Roger was famous for not using a condom. He expected his partners to be on the pill. I don't know how now, but somehow I told him if there were no chance of him getting me pregnant, I'd let him have me. He kind of sneered at me and told me something like, "Yeah, sure." Anyway, we got to arguing, and after a while, I got a piece of paper and wrote a promissory note. I told him that if I could be sure he couldn't get me pregnant, I'd spend an evening in bed with him. When she paused, I was just staring incredulously at her. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "About 6 years," was her answer. May went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Roger and her ever since then. We broke the news of her pregnancy to Roger and Crystal 2 weeks ago, and after the initial congratulations, Roger and I had gone into their garage to look at a problem he was having. Once I was out of the room, Crystal had looked her in the eye and told her the promissory note must now be due. May had been shocked that Crystal even knew about it, and stunned to discover that Crystal was taking it seriously. When Roger and I came in, I remembered a case of Dutch beer I had been going to bring to the cookout. Insisting it would only take a few minutes to get something special, I left the other 3 there and went home alone to pick up the beer. While I was gone, Crystal had raised the topic of the note again. May was surprised again to find that Roger had apparently believed the note was going to be honored. He was quite indignant to hear May was thinking of welshing on the agreement. This was all taking place after 3 hours of steady drinking, the last she would have until our baby finished breastfeeding. May had found herself agreeing to honor the old note. Before I returned, it had been decided between the 3 of them that she would entertain Roger last night. May, that's one of the strangest stories I've ever heard. And it's real hard for me to accept. I have to ask this. Who is the father of the baby you're carrying? May shrank, and the tears began falling down her cheeks again. How many other notes are now outstanding? And how many have you paid up on to date? Was my next question. May screamed at me. None. Gary, don't. I love you, Gary. This happened. It is the only time. It can't happen again. Please, Gary, listen to me. It sounds crazy trying to explain it to you, but I felt obligated. It wasn't something I planned or wanted to do. I have never been unfaithful to you. Please, please believe me. And she fell to her knees, crying, covering her face with her hands. May, please, can I ask you some questions? Will you be honest with me? Yes, Gary. Ask me. I tell you this was a one-time thing, and not something I wanted to do. My doing it seems incredible to me now, but you are worth more to me than life. I looked down at where she knelt before me. My heart was crying, and my stomach hurt. This was my best friend, the person I wanted beside me all the rest of my life. But I had to know if this person was who I thought she was. May, could you have said no to this? Yes, I could have, but I felt my honor was involved. I was afraid to tell you, afraid you wouldn't understand. But I felt that if you were in my place, you would do the same thing. When the agreement was made, I was drunk. But when I was sober, I didn't throw it out. And when it was made, I didn't note you. It was not something I did to cheat on you. It was something I promised to a friend so dear. At the time, in that place, it was right. Thinking for a moment, I replied, so you could have said no after you sobered up, but felt it was right, something you owed your friend at the time. And these many years later, you felt you still owed the debt to the man your friend of the time had become. Is that right? Yes, she answered. May, think carefully. Was this something you were looking forward to? No, she shouted. After a while, I began thinking it wasn't real after all, but just a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. Looking carefully into her eyes, I asked, what about over the past 2 weeks? Were you looking forward to this? May took a deep breath and answered, no, love, I wasn't. It was something I felt I had to do. It was an obligation, not a pleasure. I just continued looking at her. May looked down at the table. She whispered, okay, yes, Gary. I guess I was looking forward to it. But not like you're thinking. I've never even thought of cheating on you, never wanted to. But all of a sudden, this was there. I felt I had to go through with it. And if I did, I saw no reason I shouldn't enjoy it. I never felt it was something I had to do, because you were not enough for me. It was something I had to honor, so I rationalized that I might as well make it special, because nothing like it would ever happen again. Taking a great shuddering breath, I let it out slowly. May, about 6 weeks ago, I called you on my cell phone while I was driving back from that conference, remember? We teased for a few minutes, and then I asked if you wanted to meet me at the Holiday Inn in Atherton. I asked you to come, and we could make a weekend together, away from home. Maybe do some hanky-panky. I think I actually used those words. Do you remember? Sure, Gary. It was a great weekend, too, she answered with a tremulous little smile. Did you want to make that a great weekend for us, for me? I asked. What a question. Of course I did. And it was, we had a great time. And she gave me a real smile this time. Do you remember what you packed to take with you for that weekend, honey? I asked. Well, not really. I took a nice dress in case we wanted to go dancing. And we did. And some comfortable clothes to walk. Just a minute, girl. I have to turn the video on again to let you understand what this question is about. And I turned and walked back to our bedroom. Partway down the hall, I turned to make sure she was following me. And she was. Once there, I turned on the bedroom TV. I hit play on the remote. It opened with May still kneeling before Roger. She stood up and turned to the bed, which had her standing facing directly into the camera in the corner, which was taping her shame. May, what in the world are you wearing there? I asked. She blushed and answered, my white lingerie. Yeah, wife. The set I got for Valentine's Day. Do you realize you have never worn it for me except to model it when I gave it to you? Well, sure, Gary, but there's been no place to do so. She suddenly stopped, looking confused. Well, you sure didn't wear it at the Holiday Inn. I sure would have remembered. As I recall, you had gone home and changed into a peasant skirt and white blouse, the one that buttoned to the neck. When you got around to taking those off, which was after dinner when we decided to go dancing, you were wearing the white cotton panties and the bra I think you probably have on now. Do you remember what you wore to bed that night after we came back from dancing? In a little voice, she answered, my Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking her in the eye, I asked, May, you just told me the Holiday Inn weekend was special and the date with Roger wasn't. Yet you wore about the sexiest thing you own. Something I bought you for us to share, for Roger. But not for me. What does that say to you? What does it shout to me? How special do you think you are placing me? May just looked at me, her shoulders slumping a little. Honey, I continued, if I didn't love you, we wouldn't be living in this house together. If I didn't think you were something special to me, I would not be married to you. But I get an unexpected telephone call that calls off my meeting last night and fall into one of the worst nightmares I could conceive of. Roger, one of my best friends, if not my very best friend, shows up when I should have been at my meeting. He is met at the door by my woman. She takes him back to her room. She has gone to some trouble preparing for a tryst, and then gives him a damn good strip, and I see she has dressed her body to display. Something she hasn't done for me in well over a year. When I ask her about it, she says this meeting wasn't body to display. Something she hasn't done for me in well over a year. When I ask her about it, she says this meeting wasn't important to her. But she has gone to a lot of trouble dressing, putting up her hair, and applying makeup. Things she hasn't done for me since Hector was a pup. That tells me this meeting was very important to her. She considered it a treat that she had to prepare for. It also tells me that her time with me was very ordinary and of much lesser value. She wanted to treat the man, my friend, but she had no interest in treating me, her husband and partner. I saw you doing things for Roger you only do for me on special occasions if then, and doing some things for him you have refused to do with and for me. My wife blinked tears out of her eyes. Gary, it wasn't that way. It really wasn't. I love you. You are special to me. What can I do to convince you? I sat on the bed and just looked at her. I don't know just yet, May. I don't know what we can do. But I'm calling Roger and Crystal and asking them to come over tonight. From what you said, Crystal is already aware of what was going on. I looked at her a moment longer. Do you know if Roger and Crystal had anything else on their minds when this was set up? May shook her head no, and I dialed their number. Crystal answered, and I asked if she and her husband could come over for a few minutes this evening. While I was talking, May answered the door and collected the Chinese food we had ordered. Neither one of us was hungry, but I forced myself to eat. I knew this was going to be a long night, and the emotions had just begun. May just sat and toyed with her food. I almost began to believe her when she told me again she loved me. And this was just a one-time thing. It was maybe 7:15 when the doorbell rang. Before I opened the door, I told May I believed there was more to this than she understood. When I opened the door to let Roger and Crystal in, they both gave me a smile. But I don't think it was my imagination that each of them gave May a little special smile. Roger especially. His look at my wife was almost proprietary, and I noticed May cringed a little when she saw it. Sitting them down on the couch, I asked May to sit also and pointed to the couch beside Crystal. She chose instead to sit in her recliner to the side of the couch Crystal was sitting on. I kind of hemmed and hawed for a bit, kind of nattering on about several things, but I included the new monitoring system, which I had been working on. I didn't tell them it was working or what it had shown me last night. Crystal and Roger were looking pretty puzzled, wondering why I had asked them over. Finally, I asked them if they would like a drink, joking that I'd better get into my problem, or my audience was going to walk out on me. Everyone said yes to the drink, so I fixed one for everyone. We had been friends for so long. I knew what each would want this time in the evening, and in this situation. Handing Crystal her white wine, I gave Roger his Jack Daniels and 7-Up. What a waste of good liquor. I handed May the orange juice she wanted because of her pregnancy and took what looked like my gin and tonic over to the hassock sitting by the TV. Actually, it was straight tonic. Tonight, I needed to have every what about me that I had left. Sitting on the hassock with my knees spread, my elbows resting on them, and both hands hanging down between my knees cradling my drink, I looked around at each of them. Finally, looking at Crystal, I asked, "What was in it for you, Crystal? I don't quite understand." She looked puzzled, then asked, "What was what, Gary? What are you talking about?" "Last night, girl. Why did you work so hard to set it up?" Just as I finished talking, Roger sputtered and choked on the drink he had just taken. I looked at him. "Roger, I know what you got from it. But was that all? Seems to me there must be more." I tried to look at both women at once, switching my eyes back and forth. Roger, I know your reputation as a playboy. One more notch doesn't seem worth it, particularly with what I think you were risking. Why, Roger? Gary, what are you talking about? He stumbled out to me. Well, you see, guys, I was home last night. Canis was called off, and I was in the garage when you made your appointment with May, and when you came in the door. Let me show you something. And here I flipped on the TV standing beside me. The picture that came up was Liv from the camera in the spare room. I was just completing hooking this up when you came over last night, Roger. Pretty good picture, isn't it? May had her face buried in her hands, and Roger's face went pale. Crystal just looked at me with this little sexy smile. So, guys, what was this all about? I continued. Crystal crossed her legs, and one foot began bouncing up and down a little. What do you think it meant, Gary? She asked. Well, Crystal, I answered, you know you have a bit of a reputation too. Actually, it goes along with Roger's. You folks have been pretty straight with us, but I've had a couple of comments at the cons. I was pretty glad you folks hadn't said anything to us, but I'm guessing that's about to change right now. Right, Crystal? Well, this wasn't exactly the way we wanted to bring it up, but yeah, I think you may be right, was her reply. I looked over at my puzzled wife. May, up to now, I thought you were aware of this. Now I'm not so sure. Your friend and her husband, Roger here, have been in a kind of key club the past couple of years. I don't know how often, but every once in a while, a group of them get together on a Friday night. They meet in a back room at Barney's Broiler for dinner, and every couple brings one of their house keys hanging on a tag with their address on it. As they come in the back room at Barney's, they drop the key in a big barrel. It's kind of like the one you see at bingo games. After a nice dinner, and since the husbands and wives have driven separately, the wives all leave and drive to their own homes. The gals get home and get ready for some action, something with a guy they aren't used to, and who can probably get them off better than the same old meat they have at home every night. After they've gone, the guys get to draw out a key. As I understand the rules, each guy gets to look at the address, and if it's his own address, he holds it in his left hand and pulls out another key, then drops his wife's key back into the barrel. I understand some guys will check out an address, and if it's with some gal they had sex with recently, or one they don't like for whatever reason, they will draw another key. But they can only draw twice. If they pull their wife's key the second time, they're out of luck. And I understand some guys have really gotten in the soup for showing up to bonk their own wife when she was expecting action. Anyway, then the guys all have a drink before heading off to their rendezvous for the weekend. Yeah, honey. It is for the whole weekend, not just a couple of hours or a night. I've had a couple of comments from some of the cons, wondering when I was going to join. Since we were so close with Crystal and Roger, everyone involved with the key club thought we were swapping with them on the side. A lot of the other guys wanted to get into your pants. It wasn't just Roger here. The room was pretty quiet, and I looked at each of my companions carefully. May was gawping at me, clearly surprised and shocked at what I had just told her. Her eyes were huge. Crystal was giving me this little simpering smile, and her foot was bouncing a lot harder. Roger was looking smug and a bit relieved after hearing my description. Honey, I began looking at May again. Before we go any further, I think you should know something about your last night's lover. May's face went white again at my description. She clearly didn't want to be reminded just how precarious our marriage was at the moment. As you saw last night, Roger is pretty well endowed. Here, May's face went completely red, and she buried her face in her hands again. Looking over at Roger, that smug look was permanent, along with one of the biggest grins I'd ever seen. The look he was giving me was one of condescension, but I figured I'd get rid of that before the night was over. Roger is the prize at these drawings. I understand all the wives hold their breath, waiting to see if they have drawn the real blue-blooded stud bull for the weekend, just like you described for the co-eds in your college. Looking at everyone's face one more time, I added, so you see, May, you've already tasted the best. Roger was smirking at me, and when I looked at Crystal, she was smirking at May. May just seemed to be sinking into her chair, looking at me a little sickly. I just leaned back a bit on my hassock, then took a long drink of my tonic. Pretty bitter, but that's what my mouth tasted like anyway. Then I just sat and let the silence build. Roger was still looking very satisfied with himself, but it looked to me like Crystal wanted to say something. I just kept quiet and let the tension build some more. Gary, Crystal finally started, it's a pretty good deal. And all we do is add a bit of spice to the marriage. After all, we all get stale and tired of one another after a while. All we do is add some spice and keep the love and the marriage going. Ask Loverman here. He hasn't lost any of me he wants, and I think we've added some real nice variations to our lives this way. Isn't that right, Roger? Roger just grinned his stupid grin. She went on. Anyway, we just thought to show you two that loosening up a bit wouldn't break you up. Just the contrary, it will give you each a boost, and actually, I'm pretty sure it will make you closer. Your friendship wouldn't be touched, and I know each of you can use a few new ideas to use in the old bedroom. No pressures on you folks. Just think about it. We'll both be here when you make up your minds. This was the introduction, and, in a way, the confession I had been hoping for. Keeping my voice as quiet and even as I could, I answered, Well, Crystal, I appreciate your patience with me. I haven't talked this over with May, and I doubt I will do so. I'm not really interested in swapping, or as I was telling May this evening, in another partner for sex. My wife and I are intelligent, well-read, and imaginative people. We do not need to dip wicks and pull trains to improve our sex life. I think we will enjoy that life together for many more years, God be willing. The last thing I feel I have to say bothers me a lot because it sounds like I am punishing May. That's not it at all. But May, as you have said several times today, Roger doesn't participate in safe sex. I have no idea of the medical condition of all of his many sex partners, nor does he really. What I do know is that you are now carrying our child. You are going to have to visit your doctor and give him some kind of story to cover why you feel you need to be checked for STDs. And this is going to hurt both of us. We can't have sex together until we have you checked and prove negative. We can't pass something back and forth between us. Do you understand, honey? Looking over at our erstwhile best friends, I continued, I feel betrayed by both of you. I'm not sure which of you I feel angrier toward. In any case, we will have to put a kibosh on getting together for the foreseeable future. I turned the TV off, and popping the USB drive, I gave it to May. She grabbed today's newspaper, sitting unopened on an end table, wadded up a number of sheets, placed them in the fireplace, and lit a match to them after adding the drive to the pile. She and I stood and watched the fire melt, and then burn that thing, with May feeding more paper to the fire until only burned black ash remained where the thumb drive had been. When I turned around, both Roger and Crystal were out cold. Well, the chemical works. I made a phone call. Hey, Lopes, your package is ready. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened the door and welcomed Lopes. You have something for me? He asked. I pointed to the 2 limp bodies in my room. Lopes went back out and came in with 7 more men. They picked up Crystal, and as they went for Roger, I asked them to stop. I went upstairs and came down with a baseball bat. I need just a few swings. Lopes smiled and put Roger on the ground. I know the points I wanted to hit. The kneecaps, the ankles, and the 2 family jewels, all done in a few swift moves. May stood there with her mouth open. I wish he was awake. I wanted to hear the screams. He is all yours. They picked him up and took him out. Lopes came in after 5 minutes and sat with me. Thanks for the samples. We needed them. My pleasure. May was still sitting with her mouth open. After Lopez left, the night was cold, and May walked up to me and asked, "What happens to them?" "They are going to Mexico. There we have some kids learning medicine. They need some samples they can practice on." My voice was cold and flat. "What if someone comes looking for them?" she asked. "Lopes will take care of that." "You killed them. How can you be so heartless? You broke my heart and did not care what I would feel. You have no right to judge me. If you think that you can walk to the cops and sell me out, please try your luck. As per my understanding, I just ensured that they are useful to society." May was now shaking. "You said that we will be back, and we can have sex." "Well, my love, I lied. Here's what is going to happen tomorrow morning. We will get the DNA test done for the unborn child. We will wait for the results. If the results say that I am the father, I will help with the birth. However, we will not remain married. You will not take any lover till my son is 10 years old. If you do, I will ensure you are very useful. Tomorrow evening, we walk to the divorce lawyer and file for divorce. You can have the house, and I will give you support money till you get a job. Do I make myself clear?" May nodded and said, "I don't even know you were like this." I walked away and said, "Neither did I." The next day, we filed for divorce. 3 weeks later, we got the DNA report. It was my child. 4 months later, we were divorced. 2 months later, my son was born. I spend a lot of time with him. May and I do meet and talk, but I could never love her again. She never took a lover, and I helped her with support for the next 5 years, till my son could take care of himself. I never dated, and all my energy is only for my son. And yes, Lopes did send me a big thank you gift. No one came looking for the 2 samples I had sent. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.